It's easy to get lost. This is The Revenue Maze, and I'm Valerie Cobb. Join me as we navigate the halls, dead ends, and U-turns on our path towards upward growth trajectory. The Revenue Maze is sponsored by Lodestar URY, guidance and execution through fractional revenue leadership, uncovering hidden revenue streams, and empowering small business growth through process-driven sales. I am here with a cultural wordsmith, global communication wizard, author of The Language of Global Marketing, language and translation expert of Rapport International, Wendy Pease. So glad to have you on this show today.
Hi, Valerie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I've just absolutely loved reading over all the things that you've been doing over the last few years. And I'm just a big, huge proponent of some of the things that you're doing, right? So, but before we do that, obviously with everything else on the show, I just need to ask you, what is one of your company's strategies for escaping the revenue maze?
Oh, to have a weekly cash flow call.
Oh, okay.
I'm a marketing, business development, sales, idea generator. I like to be on that side of the business. And so to have to, look at the finances and deal with the revenue, the financial maze and revenue maze, I try to limit that. So, I have a bookkeeper now. I use analytics solutions, and every Monday we have our call, and I dread it. But we've gotten really efficient over it over the last few years. And, so we get through it. I know what's coming in and going out and projecting and budgeting and all that good stuff.
That's amazing. So tell me a little bit why you decided that was the biggest thing to get you out of the revenue maze.
Well, I invested on developing a technology platform and hired somebody to manage it, and got knee deep in that and realized that there were off the shelf things that we could use. I didn't want to develop a technology. So when we found that, I pulled the plug on it, but I didn't watch the expense close enough and turned around one day and went, oh crap. Where are my cash reserves? How am I going to pay for this? And it sucked. I mean, it was just horrible. It kept me up at night and I was stressed about it. And so after that, I talked to them and they said, well, are you doing a cash flow? I'm like, I know what a cash flow is, but I'm not enough on it that I can figure out exactly where the cash is at any moment. So they said, well, let's do a weekly cash flow call. So I get on and I still get some checks from clients and I prep those deposits, and he takes things in and out of what's, hit the bank account, what's expected. And we come up with a number right then and know what's coming in and what checks need to be cut or what, electronic payments need to be made.
Yeah. I'm sure that you're aware, because for what I do as a fractional chief revenue officer, you watch a lot of that, obviously for the future too. But one of the big statistics, even of this show, is that 99% of the small businesses fail in the first 1 to 5 years, right?
Yeah.
But I bet you know what why they fail, the highest statistic as to why they fail. Do you know?
No.
Cash flow.
Interesting. So I was going to say not bringing the revenue in or not getting clients, but right, they're not managing their cash flow. And that's what got me. I mean, I was 10 years into the business when I kind of lost control of that and had to say, all right, I need a process. Isn't that interesting?
It is, because I think one of the hardest, when you were talking about that, because you're in marketing, you're in all these wonderful things. The other statistic is that there's just not enough exposure to keep cash flow going, which it's tied to what you're doing, which is super exciting to me, right? Because 99% of the businesses in the United States are small businesses, and in the UK, right? Almost
Yeah.
identical statistics. And when you said to get out of it, let's talk about that. But people will say, well, why does revenue affect that? Why would that affect your show? And it's like, well, if you don't have revenue coming in, there is no cash flow. But if you're not managing the cash flow, then you don't, to me, you can make strategy decisions based on, if you're monitoring that, they go together.
Yes.
100% to me. So, I know you'll get like a CFO on and they'll go, well, those don't really, if you don't have any income coming in of any kind of stuff, there is no cash flow,
Right. Exactly. So they're so intertwined. Yeah. What I'm also very interested in on the revenue side right now is how much farther the buyer gets on the decision-making process before they're closing, and how much automation is actually working, particularly in B2B sales. Because I hear mixed things about it. I hear B2B companies that are really using automation, and then I hear other people saying, oh no, it still has to be the human connection. And that's an expensive resource if you're, getting somebody to find leads for you.
Well, I definitely have, I'm an opinionated person, but.
Oh, I want to hear those opinions.
But I won't use opinion. I will use just history and watching what's been going on and my own experience. There's a massive, there has to be a balance between the two, right? There just has to be. And there's times when, the human element doesn't need to be there, especially like in some of the e-commerce and things like that. But if you basically, the humans need automation to increase their capacity for sure, right? Mm-hmm. But to get through the digital deluge, and people probably disagree with me, but to get to that digital deluge with all the automation, everything else, you've got to have a human being sift through some of it too. Right? I just haven't found a good, successful way to say you only need a human and you only need automation. Right. And
right. So we're just starting to use a platform to automate some email outreach and looking for lists and stuff like that. So a human has to write the messages and think what's important to the clients and understand the bargain, the buyer's journey, and what's going to make us sound different. So all that part of the human, but is it worth paying for the platform and sending out more into that digital mass?
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you and I did not mean to. I thought you were done.
Well, I paused. Or is it better to have somebody that's, doing the old-fashioned phone calls, or reaching out individually on LinkedIn, or using a duck soup platform to help connect? I mean, what are you seeing or working with people on?
I definitely am a proponent of a mix of it, for sure. Once again, you've kind of described, you need that platform, because if I were to go back, and I hope Jed Blount isn't listening, but I'm a fan, and I'm kind of I call it a quiet stalker, anyways. And he's got a lot to say around, fanatical prospecting is his book, right? And he talks about that. It's a great, great book. And sometimes to prospectors, that becomes a Bible, but there's definitely what I call a 20/80 rule that he talks about a little bit, and that's that digital and the automation. It's the long haul where the human cold calling is really going to move that needle. And so when we train sales teams or if I go into a small company and start working with them, typically I will bring in definitely those cold callers to follow up and to further qualify what is actually happening. But I will definitely use the social media platforms to do the broad universe, and then I will not typically take just automation, the cold callers sift through, and then the good leads go further to the closers and things like that, you know? And so, and that is assuming that you need a B2B sales team. And we're talking B2B right now. We're not talking about e-commerce. So complete
Right,
different
yeah.
rules.
We're
Complete
B2B services, so that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah. So Jed, he has a quote, and I hope I don't get it wrong. It's off the top of my head, but he talks about the laws of familiarity. And when you're talking about the laws of familiarity, it takes 20 to 50 touches to get somebody familiar. So at what point, and then once it's familiar, you have a better chance of them closing. Because like you said, we all talk to our friends. There's so much digital deluge that it's like, well, I don't know which platform to go with. So what's your experience? There's probably 50,000 of them, and you end up asking your best friend for that question, you know, and it's like, well, I use this. Oh, I use this. And what was your experience? That's where I find that there's only so much learning through the automation that it can occur, and then a human has to help sort that out later. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, that absolutely does make sense. And so you've got to take the time to set up the process for the automation, but somebody who really understands the company and the target has to sift through. And is that one of your cold callers, or is that somebody in marketing? Or who's sifting through?
And everybody kind of does it differently. I was just on a sales audit with a company, and they had just moved their some of their customer success people under operations. And I find that revenue is the overarching, they need to work hand in hand. So sometimes a business development, or what we would call cold caller, or an SDR, sales development rep, you know, those guys will sometimes bridge the gap between marketing's inbound, right? Because that's your digital automation, your lead scoring, all of that stuff, to say, let's hand it off to somebody to further qualify. So at times, an SDR will be under a marketing team, depending on the structure. I don't typically structure it that way, because I find that their KPIs are more in line with more of the sales side. But when you're chief revenue, you're over marketing, sales, new product development, service, you know, so it buttons them all up so that they're working like a well-oiled machine in that cog, and there's no breakdown with it. You know?
Okay. Now, are you seeing people going offshore for the SDRs, or still hiring in the US, or outsourcing, or?
Well, and that's why I was so excited about what you do. And we need to get this back to what you do. I mean, we've digressed. What I've seen success with some offshoring. The challenge is it depends on your base. Now, I'm global, okay? So in the United States, it's hard to get, if the widget is something that's hard to explain, like a service, that you need to go into like a challenger model, you're not just selling a feature and benefit, it's really hard for sometimes the offshore with the language barrier to do that. So if you're in the healthcare arena, that gets very difficult. And so that SDR, BDR, there's actually groups that you can buy, I say buy, as an outsource that will appointment set, but in that space, they need to be able to talk within the cultural vernacular of that language of preference, right? So if you're speaking to somebody who is Hawaiian American and they speak English, it needs to, back to what you do, be in that kind of dialect or vernacular or culture, right? And And so that's where I find that it depends on how big the deal size is, on whether you can successfully, if you're, let's use the United States, if you're in the United States, and let's say you're outsourcing to Mexico or the Philippines, which is a big one that does a lot of outsourced cold calling, or India. Sometimes the consumers don't identify with how that cold caller talks and speaks with them. Even when you create a really good script for it, because then it becomes scripted sounding too. So if you are going to outsource, they need to be part of that team, I think, and part of your sales team. So somehow or another, you've got to have it feel like it's seamless for the customer. And so if it sounds drastically different, it's going to be hard. And you know that because that's what you've written about. So yes. I would like to hear more about you and how you have bridged that, and how, you know, and how you're actually kind of working that through, because you started, I mean, you've been in that kind of industry forever, right? How many years have you been in doing what you're doing right now with the language and culture and all that?
Well, I bought Rapport International 17 years ago. The company's been around for almost 35 years. Wow. So it's very exciting with all the changes that we have. But yes, exactly what you're talking about. Global marketing is my specialty. I always like talking to people who are doing marketing and sales and get their best practices and what they're seeing. So I did divert you. And I appreciate all that you shared. But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest revenue mistakes that we see our clients making, is not thinking global from the start. Okay. And you know, just thinking, well, I've got a big enough market in the United States. But you look at the e-commerce companies, they're putting information up there. They're getting hits from all over the world. If they're on Amazon, Amazon's providing machine translation, which just shows junk on your website or partially translated. So you're not going to sell. So pay attention to your metrics and see where people are coming in. We've had all sorts of clients call in and saying, well, I'm getting hits from China, Japan, Germany, you know, how can I respond by emails? And I'm like, forget the emails. Let's look at your website and see how we can take them through the buyer's journey, and make sure that your product or service is, you know, ready for them to use. And so there's so much potential, and all the statistics show that people want to go visit websites in their own language. 90% of people say, even if they're bilingual, they'd rather look in their native language. And over half of them will spend more money to get content in their own language. And 75% won't buy again if you don't have the after sales support. Yeah. And then you have to look at a lot of manufactured and consumer products. If you're going into Europe, you need to have the CE safety mark on there. And so we do a lot of translations of manuals and packaging to make sure that they're under the requirements for the CE mark. And it has to be high quality, because that's your liability. Yeah. So yes, that's you got to think global from the start. Make sure to use high quality translation where it counts. And that's what my book, you know, my book takes you through a whole process. You know, why do it, what the opportunity is, how do you develop a strategy of which company to, or what country to enter, what language. You can even go into other languages in the United States and increase your sales. Spanish has so many speakers here, and the US has the second largest Spanish speaking population in the world. Yeah. So even just translating your marketing material for the United States is huge. Yeah. We do a lot of translation into Spanish and French so people can do North American packaging. So it covers Mexico, the United States, the bilingual market in the United States, and Canada. Oh, you've got to have French labeling.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Well, and it makes sense. I love how you've got all the metrics around it. But as you go back, you think about people buy for their reasons, right? Mm-hmm. And if you give them any reason to not buy, then there's that challenge. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Well, that means that as much as, and we all love, you know, diversity and inclusion and all of those things. But we can't stop a consumer from having their first 10 seconds of perception and making a decision. And if they see something in the language that doesn't identify with them because they're comfortable, if you think about how you're just really comfortable being around your family, right? That language, that whole communication is what makes people feel comfortable with what that is, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I have loved that. We talked about healthcare, right? And them having to do in the United States, the top 15 languages in their state, they have to have it all translated. But taking it further with some of the ACO and payers, where they will literally create care journals and all sorts of things within the cultural aspect of that same language, so I love what you're doing. That is amazing. And that's very difficult. So tell me a little bit, what's your biggest challenge today with it?
It's interesting. Probably the biggest challenge is finding people that understand the importance of quality translation. I mean, there's so much easy access to Google Translate or machine translation, and people don't speak the other language. They go, oh, this is cool. The machine can handle it. Like machines handle so much for us now. Yeah. But they really don't understand how clunky it is. And and even the navigation, I went to a website from China, and just playing around, I was looking to see if they had translation, and I could see the Google plugin, and I did the drop down, and all the languages were in Chinese. So I couldn't figure out where I had to navigate to get to the English. So yeah, I could click on them and play around, but nobody else is going to do that. I wasn't going to buy. I just was doing my, industry research on how would it be. And so if you put the Google, I can't tell you the number of times I've been on English websites. And if we go to Built With and run a list of which websites have the Google Translate plugin in them, it comes up with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of websites with that in there. And a lot of governments are using them. And that makes me worried, because there's been liability cases against governments for using Google Translate. And it's been against hospitals too, because there's been real fatalities because of that. And so, and now the whole DEI push, which I think is, I can talk about that next, but with the whole DEI push, what's got to be included in there is language. And if you're not treating people equally and giving them access to it, you're going to have problems there. So, and the DEI, I'm a huge fan of, because it used to be, it was the right thing to do. But now there's so much research out there that shows you that companies perform better, they're more creative, and they have better cultures when they've got diversity, equity, inclusion included. And it's not just diversity. You've got to make sure they feel welcome. And the revenues go up from that, because they understand who their buyers are, because they've got people internally that can communicate that. Yeah. I mean, there's a great Pepperidge Farm story about their cookies, and the marketing team or the development team says, hey, how come Latinos don't buy Pepperidge Farm? They said, well, you don't have our favorite flavor. You don't have strawberry. Oh, so they created a strawberry cookie, and guess what? Flew off the shelves in certain areas.
It is. I lived in the Cayman Islands for a number of years, and it's just kind of it's a very tiny island with a cultural melting pot. And it was, we just didn't have the luxury back in 2004 that we do today with all the internet and those kinds of things, because it was pre-iPhone. That will tell you the shift, right? So I guess for me, it was just eye-opening, because we had Cuban refugees pull up to our dock, and we had all of these things that my children got that great exposure, but you just realized you're not the center of the universe, right? I know, actually, I've lived 20 gazillion different places, and I have a place here that is Wallace, Idaho, and their mayor declared them the center of the universe, which is a joke, right? But to them, it's real. It's like a town of 2,000 people and they have a festival around it. But we're a global community. We have been a global community, and you know, what you're doing creates such a great bridge for all
well,
of that.
the other thing that gets me is the center of everything is anybody who's doing global business and says, well, English is the global language. You're kind of fooling yourself. I mean, I just read a research study about a Japanese company who looked into productivity of their workers, and they found out that the Japanese executives who could speak English fine were spending half their time deciphering emails to try to figure out what to do. Now, can you imagine having to spend that much time reading emails? I mean, we get too many already. And so you know, it seems almost impossible. Well, how do I put my email into Japanese if I don't speak English back and forth? But I do a lot of training on how to make your companies more inclusive across language, and how, you know, there are ways that you can build to communicate so it will be easier. And then there's always telephone interpreting for if you have to have a quick call. It's inexpensive. You pay by minute. There's no setup charges. There's no monthly fees. You just pay by minute for when you have somebody on. So there's lots of little tricks on how you handle a multilingual workforce. And we have a case study, Boston Centerless, on our website that gives a lot of information about that.
Yeah, that's incredible, because I could have used that at my last full-time equivalent, you know, because that's very much an issue. So I'm glad to know about that. So
yeah, and right now with people having such a hard time hiring, it's an untapped resource, because if you're in a company that wants to hire, like say a manufacturing company, they pay good wages, they have job stability, they offer benefits. Oftentimes it's continuing education. There's room for advancement, and tapping it, you know, so people don't speak English. You know, if they're people who pay attention to detail and are hard workers, and if you can figure out how to train them, which we can help you with, then you can hire and have a really loyal workforce, because it's a good job that they can have here in the United States. Yeah. Or, you know, whatever country you are listening to this.
And that is you know, that's another good one. I thought about that. Yeah, I'm already ticking things in my head that goes, I could use them for this. I could use them for that, you know? And,
do share, do share.
Well, I do. I agree. I mean, even as a fractional CRO, I am setting up a company with a business partner out of Scotland. And the reason that we are doing that is basically, I love the ITR economic reports, and I study them on a regular basis. And you know, and they've talked about recession proofing and where you go when there is a recession and all of those things. Mm-hmm. So my 5-year plan and my 10-year plan is strategically placing certain things in the different countries so mm-hmm. that I have a little bit of diversification, even as a small company. I'm a very small company, right? And so it's like, and then one of my goals is to provide opportunity, right? So you provide opportunity on top of it, but how do you go into like some of the mega cities are in Africa, and the prevailing, there's all the different tribes and different languages there, but ITR recommended learning French because you know, because I thought, well, I'm from California, I'll learn Spanish or I'll learn this, you know, and it was like, for the global, you should be looking at French. And I was thinking to myself, oh, you know, I hadn't even really, but then with your business, I could get an interpreter on there that could learn do the French for me. And
I started out a couple presentations with, you know, to new exporters, how many languages do you need to know to export efficiently?
Uh-huh.
And, sometimes people will think about it and they'll say 2 or 3, and they speak Spanish, Chinese. This is the first time I've heard French, but it makes sense. And my premise is, you're running a business. When are you actually going to have time to sit down and learn that many languages well enough to do business? And so, yes, you're lucky if you can hire people. If you're bilingual in the United States, or you're a high schooler listening to this, get bilingual immediately, because that just raises your, people wanting to hire you. But my premise is by setting up efficient translation and interpretation, it's not a cost. You're getting an ROI on that. And once you get the process down, then you can duplicate it across other languages.
Yeah. It's a similar business model as to what I put out when I say fractional leadership, right? There is a point where a company definitely needs to bring in a full-time equivalent. They need to bring in whatever that is, if they're a certain size. And then there is a point where small businesses can benefit from that knowledge of all the years and hire somebody fractionally to go in and fix that. We do that all the time with CFOs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't think that you can actually outsource revenue leadership, right? You don't think all the time that just doesn't come up. And I think with you, like when you were talking about it, it was like, I could just hire that interpreter. I could just,
yes.
it as an outsource, because the return on investment is higher than when I hire a full-time equivalent to just constantly be on my side. It's the same kind of methodology, right? And
there's little tricks you can do. Like we've had clients that, so one I'm thinking of in particular, they manufactured a specialty material and they went over to Korea to present to the government about these specialty materials for police or military or something. They were the only ones that translated their presentation, because all their negotiations had been done in English. And they ended up winning the deal because they were the only ones that translated their presentation and really made the people feel included and they understood what was going on. So even if you're going international and the people speak English, but you're in Spain or France or Africa and they've got, it isn't their native language, translate your presentation. That's like baby step number 1 that goes huge. And then you can reuse that content on your website. So if you're doing a sales presentation in particular, it's all content that you could have on there as a downloadable asset or, a landing page.
Oh, yeah. And that's another good, thing that I hadn't even thought of, because you do, when you're trying to, it translates. I think it was Jen Allen posted, and she's with the Challenger group, which I'm a big fan of Challenger. She had posted talking about sales being like dating. And it was funny because I had just coached a sales rep that before you ask for the sale, date a little bit,
Yeah.
we were talking date a little bit, but it's the same thing with what you were saying. I'm drawing the comparison because it honors people, right?
Yes.
It has them, and you're always on your best behavior when you're dating, right? If you were, I haven't dated for 33 years, but it's like you try to cater to that person that you're talking to, right? Because you're trying
you want to click, you want to get along.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, that is so right. I love it. Okay. So what excites you about the future?
Well, I joined EO a couple of years back. It's Entrepreneurs Organization. Okay. And I'm loving that because I'm connected to business owners around the world. And so I'm learning so much. And it's actually ironic. They're taking off the blinders of what my revenue goals were to grow to. I'm like, I could do that. I could do that. So that excites me in the future. Like I know where I wanted to get it to. And now I'm like, I could do double that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
that, and then the other thing is, when I started off, I had a really small team, and now I've got a really amazing team. And each person that we add in, it's so fun to see the culture developing and how people support each other and how we're all learning new things. And so that's been really fun over the last few years.
Good. Yeah, that infusion. That's awesome. Yeah, I've heard that I have not attended that organization, but I have a lot of people that I know that do. I've done Vistage, but I understand it's really fantastic.
It
So
is.
I've
It
actually
is.
looked at potentially signing up with them because of all the good things that I've heard from that organization, especially for the entrepreneur, so
Yeah.
obviously EO, entrepreneurial.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. There's their plug for today. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, like, from little you to today, how did you get to where you are right now? What took you there?
From little me, or how I ended up exactly here?
Yeah, not like 100 years, but was there a defining moment that said, hey, I want to be in, language, I want to be doing what I'm doing today? I mean, what moved you that direction?
Okay, so I'll give you the summary. I lived in Mexico, Taiwan, and the Philippines when I was growing up. And I have always loved languages and cultures and getting along with people and try to figuring out how to communicate, even if you don't speak their language. At one point, I said to my dad that in high school, I'd like to be an interpreter. And he said, nah, go get to be bilingual and specialize in a topic, which is advice I give people now, even when I'm in the industry. Now, I never got to be fully bilingual. I found that I loved the language of business. So when I got out of undergrad from Penn State, I thought I was going to go back to law school, but I ended up getting into sales and loving that, because you're on the happy side of business. You're not on the legal side.
Yeah.
So I was in all sorts of business to business services in selling. And then I owned a company before I went to business school at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. And coming out of there, I went into senior roles in global marketing and business development. And then I was laid off on both maternity leaves.
Oh.
And I don't want to work for anybody else anymore. A VC company that can sell and move to someplace else, a large global company that decides to eliminate their corporate marketing department. I said, I want to go back to owning my own business because I can balance my family and my life. And I ran into somebody who said, buy a business. And I laughed and I'm like, what money? I worked at portfolio companies of venture capital firms. And but I started daydreaming. I just searched buy a business, and this little language company came up, and the seller wanted to do something else, but she said it responds well to marketing. I said, it's got a similar business model to what I did before. So lo and behold, I became owner. And about 10 years after that, I bought another company, and I'm looking at acquiring another one. So I really bought my way into something I was really interested in. And I did it because I wanted to be able to balance my life better.
And now today, everybody wants that model, right? That's the whole work from anywhere, the whole, like, you're like the happening person, right? So
thanks.
My kids always say, Mom, you were Pinterest before Pinterest was a thing, right? You were like the work from anywhere before it was a thing.
Oh, we were virtual before there was a cloud. I remember hearing about the cloud. I'm like, okay, we do that. But now it's gotten so much easier. And I can remember researching, maybe 7, 8 years ago about how do you build a culture for a virtual team, and now all this stuff is coming out. I'm like, okay, yeah, that might work. Wish I had it then.
That was the way it was. I've been paperless since 2001.
Yeah.
And, it was a good thing. We had, when we were living in the Cayman Islands, the whole island got hit by a Category 5 hurricane and decimated it. And everybody who had paper and photos and everything else, I had an external hard drive that was probably 12 inches by 12 inches. We've got these little things and I had because I didn't like file cabinets, and I didn't like that you couldn't search for things easy in a file. You had to remember your system. And I guess I hate having to just always, I like that crutch of being able to search. And so I was so grateful that, you know, when we were at Cayman, that was the case. And I mean, I think Skype was coming online, but it was spotty at best, you know,
Yes.
at the time. And internet was spotty at best. And that was the day of the life drive from Palm. I've done a presentation that is called So Long Palm, and how they went into obscurity because of Apple and new product development, you know. And
The old Palm Pilot. He said I should keep it. It's going to be an antique. I'm like, really?
I know. And now you're like, I should have kept it because these crazy people buy these things. But anyways, that is fantastic. So tell me a little bit about what advice you would maybe give some of the people who are listening that are trying to move in that direction.
I'd say reach out to me on, you can do it either on our website, which is Rapport Translations. Rapport is like the French word, RAPPORT, because I can connect you to the direct person in your state that can give you free advice on how to export and how to get a grant to support your global marketing efforts. Wow. So either reach out to me on the website, or you can go to my Linktree. Linktree is where I keep all my links. It's a free, I mean, I love this platform. It's a free place to keep all your links. So if you prefer LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, you can connect with me on any of those. So Linktree is linktr.ee/Wendy Pease. And it's Wendy Pease, like peas and carrots. And so you can get a few free chapters of the book. You can connect to the Global Marketing Show podcast that I host if you want to hear from other people that are doing it. You can contact me. You can find our website. So it's a great place to go.
Wow. Well, that would be actually, I'm already taking notes because I'm like, okay, yeah, I would love to figure out how to get some marketing grants for my global company that I'm setting up, the mini me's around the world, you know, and I should, yeah, definitely. We need to have a conversation around that for sure, you know, so.
Yes. That's a great idea.
Did you tell people the name of your book? I can't remember if you.
Oh, it's called, well, maybe you said I was an author. It's called The Language of Global Marketing.
Oh, yes, I did. At the very beginning, I said it. I was like, make sure you plug your book, because that's gotta be an amazing thing. And I put it on my list. I'm an avid, I work out and listen to books. You know, that's how I get to 5 million of them. I'm like, okay, yeah. I love it.
I recorded the audio version, so you can find it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of the places. And I recorded the audio version in a wine cellar in my basement that I use for storing gifts. But it doesn't last long enough in a wine cellar. So, but it has really good audio.
That's awesome. That is very good. And so, mostly this has been an amazing podcast. Thank you so much. I want to thank Wendy Pease. She just gave all her plugs of where you can go. And we laughed a little bit. We learned a little bit about the globe today. And I've got like 7 or 8 nuggets that I'm going to take back for myself and my company. And so I'm so grateful for you and for everybody who's listening on this podcast today. So thank you again, Wendy. That's awesome.
It's been my pleasure talking to you, Valerie. And we'll schedule time after this so I can introduce you to the person in Idaho. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. All right, there it is. This has been another great episode of the Revenue Maze. Thank you so much, and see you guys next time. Thank you all for joining another great episode. For show notes, links, and resources, visit revenuemaze.com. And never forget, you are why.